Some...
I think the point he's making, that's Professor Wole Soyinka, in terms of extremism, is talking about the killings that have occurred so far. I don't think that we should compare apples and oranges here about the extremism in terms of religion in that regard.
Audrey, I'm making my point,
Yes.
and I know where I'm going.
Okay.
You cannot make my point for me.
Okay.
Hello and welcome back to Okpe'S Trending Gist. Today, we are diving into a crucial, often very sensitive topic, the ongoing security crisis in Nigeria. We will be looking at a clip from Arise News where a panel discusses Nobel Laureate Professor Wole Soyinka's recent comments, which challenged the narrative around violence. The conversation gets heated as different perspectives clash on whether this is truly a religious war or something far more complex. Stick around because understanding the nuances here is absolutely vital. So sit back and take a watch.
Let's begin what's trending. Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka has challenged U.S. President Donald Trump's characterization of Nigeria's security crisis, insisting the conflict is not a Christian-Muslim war, but a battle against extremist groups. Speaking during an interview with Democracy Now!, Soyinka stated that Trump's sweeping statements distort the true picture and risk deepening religious hostilities. The playwright emphasized that Nigeria is dealing with extremist political Islamists known as ISWAP or Boko Haram, and not Muslims as a people. Let's take a look.
The Christian Islam or Islam versus the rest, or even Christianity versus the rest, that kind of dichotomy has existed, as I said, for quite a few decades. We've had unquestionably the issue of impunity. In other words, if we identify, for instance, certain extreme groups in one religion, and the perpetrators of these horrors get away with it openly. There was a girl, a student, who was brutally lynched, really savage and dehumanized before being killed. The perpetrators who were charged to court, who were eventually acquitted, or at least the charges dismissed, when it gets to the level where such perpetrators go on internet displaying a box of matches and saying, I quote, "There's the box of matches with which I killed. I was the one who set fire to her," and nothing happens to them and they walk free. Now, it is those kinds of incidents which escalates in popular perception that there is a brutal war going on between Christians and Muslims. Whereas in truth, we're dealing with extremists. We're dealing with political Islamists, known sometimes as ISWAP across West Africa or Boko Haram within Nigeria. These are the real enemies of society.
All right, Vimba, Professor Soyinka's intervention provides a crucial nuance, reminding us that the real enemy is extremism that weaponizes religion for political and economic gain, killing Muslims and Christians alike. And I'll just take a reaction. Obviously, his comment, because of how, diverse the conversation has been, has garnered a lot of reactions. But I'll just take one and I'll come to you, Vimba. Godfrey wrote on X, he said, with respect to Professor Soyinka, downplaying Nigeria's crisis as not Christian-Muslim ignores reality. Extremists have a clear agenda. History shows Arab, Islamic forces enslaved Black Africans for 1,300 years. Global attention, like Trump, is an opportunity, not a threat. I mean, this ex-user, believes Professor Wole Soyinka is actually downplaying the conversation. But we all know that we have these extremist groups, history in time. We know that this is the actual group that has been targeting, whether it be Christians or Muslims. We've also heard these groups, call out the name of Allah when they do the killings with the Christians as well.
Extremism is, we all know, is not unique to Nigeria or to the Sahel. We've seen similar groups across the world, specifically in the Middle East. At the moment, you see groups like Hamas, for example. They are terrorist organizations. Their philosophy and their indoctrination is very clear, which is that they are anti-anything that is not an extreme form of what they consider to be Islam. Because again, if you sit down with Muslim faithful, they will tell you that our religion does not condone X, Y, and Z. So it's very important to make that distinction. However, having said that, we also need to remember that extremism here in Nigeria has an equally targeted Christians, because as much as it targets moderate Muslims, I remember Ayo made this point very profoundly the other day. However, those who are most vulnerable are Christians because they are more obviously not part of that, not aligned with the cultures and the traditions. Whereas a moderate Muslim, for example, will seem to appear to be more in tune with the cultural perspective. For example, the dressing, just a simple example. So it's easier to pick out a woman who is dressed in a Western way versus somebody who is maybe wearing their hijab and so forth. So that targeting makes it easier. Having said that, it's also important for us to now remember that Nigeria's challenges have now snowballed into economic issues. We know the economy around the insecurity that has been created. We know that there are some communities that even safeguard and protect these people because, for example, if you're somebody who sells soft drinks for a living, they'll buy your soft drinks at a premium, 300, 400% more than the local market price. Right. And in doing so, they've induced the locals. Mm-hmm. Now, secondly, we know that this has also snowballed into criminality, general kidnapping, people who have an interest in kidnapping for ransom and so forth, are now hiding under the cover of the extremism that hasn't been nipped in the bud. So, we can't downplay it. We can't reduce it to say that, oh, it's not Christians, whatever. The foundational issue is there, and it exists from a historical context, which I've spoken on several times here. From the 19th century, we know that there's been this southward movement towards the coast, and they say, some of these extremists will say the plan is to take the Quran to the sea. So, we can't downplay that for the sake of, politics or sounding politically correct. The facts are there.
The facts are there, Vimbai. Meanwhile, a prominent Nigerian televangelist is sparking intense debate with explosive claims about the history of violence against Christians in the country. Apostle Michael Olowokere made the remarks during a recent sermon that has since gone viral on social media. The preacher alleges that the root of terrorism and mass killings of Christians in Nigeria stretch back decades, long before recent security crisis. He claims he grew up in northern Nigeria, already knowing that Christians were endangered species. Let's take a look.
In 1992-93 in Kaduna, a riot broke out which they call the Zango Kataf riot. I was a young boy, very, very young then, and people were killed in scores. If you are not an Afsa person practicing Muslim in Islam, they were killed. Especially if you are from the southern part of Kaduna, the tribes from the southern part of Kaduna, they were massacred. It was called the Zango Kataf riot. And if the next thing they do is to burn churches, kill Christians, and then if they are done with that, then they focus on businesses that is for Igbo people, Igbo-owned businesses, and they destroyed it. I grew up knowing that Christians are an endangered species in Nigeria. In the year 2000, when the Sharia riots, how many of you have heard of the Sharia riots? Hundreds of thousands of people were killed in Kaduna. I can remember vividly that we had to defend our house from people. They brought some Fulani boys and they faced our house. They were shooting arrows. They were stoning our zinc. They spot our zinc shooting arrows. Even though I was a Muslim then, even though my father was a Muslim then, but because majority of the people in our compound were Christians, so they were willing to destroy every one of us because we're living with Christians.
All right, everyone's speaking up now, Rufai. When these are serious historical claims from the preacher, and they've, clearly struck a chord, particularly among Nigerian Christians, who say his account reflects experiences that have been overlooked far too long. The question many are now asking is, when did targeted attacks against Christians actually begin? Was it decades ago, as the apostle suggests, or gradually escalating over time? or is it primarily tied to more recent insurgencies and banditry, as authorities often claim at the moment? Rufai, he highlighted different aspects from, I believe, 2014 all the way down to the time of Goodluck Jonathan. He mentioned names and talked about how banditry started, how terrorism started. Documented facts. I mean, I encourage our viewers to, go watch the full clip. It was about 15 minutes. I know you wanted to speak on Wole Soyinka as well. I'd like for you to tie in both stories, and I'll take this.
See, I have seen a lot of ignorance. I'm playing to the gallery since this conversation started. I can see a lot of folks now think it's a fight between Christians and Muslims. It is not. And I've repeated that for the upton time.
Yes.
Secondly, there are extremists across every religion. Every religion. Yes, as extremism across every religion you can think of. As long as there's a religion, there's a belief system, there are people that take their belief system to extreme. That's what extremism is all about.
I think the point he's making, that's Professor Wole Soyinka, in terms of extremism, is talking about the killings that have occurred so far. I don't think that we should compare apples and oranges here about the extremism in terms of religion in that regard.
Oji, I'm making my point,
Yes.
and I know where I'm going.
Okay.
You cannot make my point for me.
Okay.
They are extremists.
But you have to explain what you mean by
across
extremism
every
in
religion.
the other religions.
And I succinctly explained, Oji, by saying that as long as you have a belief system, which is a religion, they are extremists across that.
Okay.
What is happening in this regard, all right, is genocide against Christians. Muslims too are being killed. We get that. But the people that this killing has happened selectively and that they have complained in Benue, Yelwata, and other areas are Christians.
Correct.
And it passes the law of genocide because replacement is also happening. They can't go back to those communities. All right? So if Wole Soyinka is talking about extremism, no, this is just persecution and genocide killings against Christians.
Islamic extremists, that's what he meant, yeah.
So extremists, Islamic extremism,
That's what he meant.
I do not think it's right to put terrorist killing groups that have an agenda under extremism. I do not think so, because it's not right. Because it's an orchestrated agenda. And guess what? They do not kill solely for that intent. They also engage in criminality, they also engage in crime, and they set out to kill a particular group of people. So I'm just trying to make a clear decision out of it. Secondly, what this reverend is saying is not today. We all know about the Zango-Kataf riots.
Yes.
We all know, even way back, the Zango-Kataf has spanned many years. Interreligious and ethnic problems. But the rabbit hole a lot of people are pushing the narrative to that I don't want us to go to is the fact that, it's Christians against Muslims. Because so you have extremists, Christian mentality, then you have extreme Muslim mentality. And I'll give you a very strong point. While some people are trying to push this argument that it's Christian-Muslim, one of our analysts that used to normally come here, Dahiru, was saying, and he came out clearly on television saying, I'm a Muslim, but I don't support what the Sultan said to mitigate the fact that there's Christian genocide in this country. So does it mean every Muslim think like that? No. There are some Muslims that know that there's Christian genocide, and they're speaking up against it. Dahiru spoke.
They are speaking up against the Islamic extremists.
So let's be clear as regards this.
Right.
That's just the point I'm making. Because there's a lot of ignorance. And people, when they go the path of ignorance, they also go the path of extremism.
All right.
Welcome back. That was certainly an intense discussion, and it highlights just how complex and deeply felt the issue surrounding insecurity in Nigeria are. What we just witnessed was a clash of perspectives, particularly between Professor Wole Soyinka's nuanced view, echoed by Okpe'S and Vimbai, and Rufai Oseni's insistent framing of the violence as Christian genocide. Let us break down these critical takes. Professor Wole Soyinka, a voice of immense intellectual authority, opened with a crucial distinction. He argued that the conflict in Nigeria is not a Christian-Muslim war. Instead, he pointed the real enemy as the extremist groups like ISWAP and Boko Haram, who he explicitly stated are not Muslims as people, but rather political Islamists who exploit religion for their own ends. He rightly criticized US President Donald Trump's broad characterization, warning that it distorts the true picture and risks deepening religious hostilities. Soyinka'S central message is about identifying the actual perpetrators and their political motivations rather than demonizing an entire faith. He further highlighted the issue of impunity, where perpetrators of horrific acts are often acquitted or have charges dismissed, fueling the cycle of violence. Okpe'S in her summary perfectly captured Soyinka'S essence, reminding us that the true adversary is extremism that weaponizes religion for political and economic gain, and that this extremism kills both Christians and Muslims alike. This is a vital point. The victims span across religious divides, highlighting that the conflict is not simply bilateral between two faiths. Wole then brought in a broader context, pointing out that extremism isn't unique to Nigeria and exists globally, citing groups like Hamas. She emphasized that these groups are anti-anything that is not an extreme form of what they consider to be Islam. She further elaborated on the interconnectedness of these challenges, noting how insecurity has snowballed into economic issues, with some local communities even safeguarding extremists due to economic incentives. Wole also acknowledged that while both Muslims and Christians are targeted, Christians might be more obviously vulnerable due to visible cultural differences like dress, making them easier targets. Now, let's address Rufai's intervention. While he initially seemed to agree with the idea that the conflict isn't a simple Christian-Muslim war, his narrative quickly shifted. He vehemently pushed the idea of a Christian genocide, dismissing other interpretations as ignorance. When Oji attempted to guide him back to Soyinka'S specific point about political Islamists and how extremism isn't synonymous with an entire religion, Rufai firmly stated, "I'm making my point and I know where I'm going," effectively shutting down the nuanced correction. Rufai's insistence on labeling the targeted killings of Christians as genocide against a religious group rather than a fight against extremism that uses religion is a critical distinction. While the rebuttal attack against Christians are undeniable and horrific, framing it solely as Christian genocide can be problematic. It risks overlooking the intricate web of political, economic, and ethnic factors that contribute to the violence, as both Soyinka and Wole clearly articulated. It also risks alienating moderate Muslims who equally condemn the atrocities committed in the name of their faith and who themselves are often victims of same extremists. The point about extremism across every religion that Rufai tried to make is valid in a general sense, but the panel was specifically discussing the Nigerian context. Soyinka'S genius lies in precisely differentiating between the religion itself and extremist political ideology that perverts it. By dismissing this nuance, Rufai's argument risks oversimplifying a complex crisis and potentially fueling religious polarization, which is exactly what Soyinka warned against. He saw the targeted nature of killings as proof of genocide, separate from general extremism, creating an us versus them narrative that belies the internal complexity and the shared suffering. Ultimately, the debate underscores the urgent need for careful language and deep understanding when discussing such volatile issues. The true enemy, as Professor Soyinka articulates, is indeed the extremism that weaponizes religion for its own twisted gains, affecting people of all faiths. Thank you for watching Okpe'S Trending Gist. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful discussions. Until next time, stay informed and think critically.